Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. This morning's briefing dovetails with yesterday's in that we're going to continue discussing the threat to black empowerment that comes from these tethers, but this time we're going to do it with a historical view. So we're going to focus on the fact that there's nothing new about it. I'll be reading an entire article from a publication called Negro Digest. This article in particular came to my attention through Twitter, one of those rare occasions when the website actually gives something good. Now, by the way, if that name Negro Digest, if it doesn't even sound remotely familiar, there's a reason for that. It's a very old publication that went out of print a long time ago. The article that I'm going to read for you in its entirety was written by a man named Lennox Raphael, who was of West Indian descent, and he felt moved to expose and call out the rabid anti-FBA hostility from the West Indian immigrants. But that's only half of the reason why I want you to know about this article. The other half of the reason is that this was published in November of 1963. That's before the Voting Rights Act or the Civil Rights Acts were passed. It's before the Immigration and Nationality Act of 65, which lifted the immigration restrictions on black immigrants, was passed. What were the attitudes of these Caribbean blacks towards foundational black Americans before Kamala Harris's allegedly Jamaican father came here to cruise for non-black sex? What were their attitudes before the likes of Candace Owens' people got here and the Eric Holders and the Kristen Clarks? We know what the attitudes have been of the Caribbean immigrants who came after 65. But this Negro Digest article, written by a man of West Indian descent, documents what it was before 65, and that this anti-FBA hostility has a long track record. You'll be disgusted by what you hear, but of course not surprised. In fact, the article reads as if we, the New Voices of Black Media, wrote it, even though it was written before any of us were even born. And I should also mention that the person credited with having brought this article to people's attention is a Twitter account under the name Strictly for My NGZ, so salute to them. Now, the title of this article is To Be or Not to Be an American Negro. Some West Indians resent being called Negroes, and yet they are not accepted as white, and they're too well off here to go back to the islands. My aunt was very happy yesterday. I hadn't seen her so happy for a long, long time. She had become an American citizen. Proudly, she unwrapped the letters from the governor and the mayor and showed them to me. Her happiness seemed so pathetic, so wanting of something which is essential to happiness, belief, that I felt sorry for her. Imagine, she said, hugging me effusively, the governor and the mayor wrote me. Me! That's a fine action on the part of the governor and the mayor, I told her, handing back the standard informal letters which bore the signatures of the two officials, stamped by anonymous clerks. Well, you can stay here for the rest of your life now, I told her. She turned on me as though I had cursed her. Who? Me? Not me and these people. I can never be an American. But you have citizenship now. That doesn't mean anything. Citizenship doesn't mean much to her, she says in an effort to cover up what really means so much to her. A woman past 50 here in the USA for 5 years. She doesn't want to be considered an American Negro. As a matter of fact, she's ashamed of being an American Negro. And this is the standard neurosis of the average West Indian immigrant. He or she does not want to be considered an American Negro. Subconsciously, they believe that the white man prefers them as non-American Negroes. In short, she wishes to be the white man's favorite nigger, and he may well be happy because he seems to be succeeding in dehumanizing himself. This is the color complex of the West Indian Negro, one who doesn't understand the fight for freedom in America, one who doesn't wish to understand it, and one who, even understanding it, doesn't have any sympathy for it. It's a further chapter in the history of the international black man's effort to escape from his skin and his being. I have yet to meet a West Indian Negro who doesn't feel he is better than the American Negro and, therefore, equal to the American white with whom he wishes to associate. Not everybody born in the West Indies can be a Sidney Poitier or a Cleveland Robinson, two of the many West Indians who have entered the mainstream of American life. The majority, whether they come from Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, or Grenada, or any other part of the Caribbean, seek to degrade the American Negro. Somebody once said that the immigrant was a mad dog in search of any bone, and every time he found a bone, he would cross a bridge, look down in the water, see a larger bone, drop his own, and run down the bank of the river to be deceived by his unquenchability. Well, the immigrant Negro in America seems to be the mad dog with a bone in his mouth, constantly dropping it and finding others throughout this long search for an identity. Some time ago, I met a Jamaican in a Greenwich Village bar. I asked him whether he had become an American citizen. No, and never. Soon he was lashing out at the defects of the American Negro and pretending to be holier than they in the castle of his unpopular skin. They are animals, he said. They are this and they are that. I challenged his statements. Oh, you wouldn't know, he parried. You have to work with them. He works with them, with some civil rights organization in New York. This young man is about 26 years old. He came here 3 years ago to study engineering. Now he works part-time with this civil rights organization. But what can he do in the interest of civil rights, buried down as he is with such prejudices? Back in Jamaica, his father is an executive member of some branch of the government, his uncle is an internationally respected writer, and in his island home, he's a prince in a shoe, and nobody dares call him nigger or any name to that effect. But here in New York or any other part of the United States, he struggles. He's a black man, a Negro. So, in order to retain an identity which can set him apart from what he considers the irresponsible mob, he stays in his Caribbean closet. I'm from Jamaica, he says when you meet him. But he doesn't even have to say it. The exact preservation of his accent will warn you. However, that still won't be enough. To show you how much he's not a part of the American dilemma, he will criticize American Negroes, even going so far as to openly call them niggers. And, as soon as his studies are finished, he intends to return to his island home and become a small bureaucrat. He is not unlike my aunt and the thousands of other aunts there are. My aunt rents a room from a Trinidadian, a woman who is an American citizen, a woman who has children born in America, but a woman who would never stand to be called an American. Because once you make her an American, you make her an American Negro. This woman spends her time thinking so many things of the American Negro that, in attempting to be such a generous thinker, she generally manages to outsay those whites who think the worst of any Negro. They have no morals, she says, because they drink beer out of cans. They don't know how to rear their children. They are lazy and without ambition. We came here, she said, meaning the thousands of West Indians in the States, and in so little time we have educated our children and bought so many apartment houses here in New York. But they, the American Negroes, talk of the South. Why don't they leave the South and come here? You tell me. I told her that hundreds of Negroes leave the South every week in search of a better life, but to no avail, my words falling on deaf ears. She will not rent her rooms to an American Negro without the recommendation of someone she respects. Years ago, she sent her daughter to a predominantly white school, and the child was accepted as an American Negro, which she in fact was. When she discovered that, she branded the child, to the child's protests, by putting gold bracelets on her wrists, bracelets being then a mark of West Indianism. I was talking to another woman. She has 2 children, one at Vassar and the other at Dartmouth. We were discussing the Negro child's search for an identity in America. Oh, she said proudly, my children never had those problems. You know, their father and I were born in the West Indies. Immediately, she seeks to unmake their Americanhood. She tells me not to think of them in the context of the average boy or girl because their parents are from the Caribbean. It's the same with almost every West Indian parent in the States. The majority of them believe that the British system of education is much better than the American, and some of them translate their belief by sending their children to study in the islands or in England. One of their standard complaints is that the American child who doesn't have the good luck to grow up in the home of West Indian parents ends up being badly behaved and ambitionless. Children in America, they say, are badly behaved, not like kids in the West Indies, kids who never say no, kids who are completely dependent on their parents, even while in their 20s. They like this type of spineless child, but not the fast-moving American child in this tense and unfaithful society. They believe that the American Negro is ambitionless and uneducated, and they maintain this belief even in the face of strong proof of the contrary, because it's part of the chain of beliefs which helps them to pass their days in another country, a crutch to lessen their insecurity. They want to see the unfavorable, so they see it. I have never been segregated, says one who has spent 30 years in the white man's kitchen, cleaning his floors and suffering humiliations. And I don't see why there should be so many demonstrations and so much unrest. I know white people, and they're not so bad. She is serious. Yes, I tell her, I know that you know the white man, but you know him too well, so well that you have forgotten yourself. But I'm a fool, she doesn't listen, and I realize she will die believing the same thing, so may God bless her. In the West Indies, everyone jostles for the chance to come to America. Everyone. It's the extensive gold mine waiting for intrepid diggers, and those who are here are generally teachers, civil servants, nurses, skilled persons, and students. They come because they want a better life. They come to study, or they come to work. Usually they do both. But there are also those who do nothing. They come out of a society where to be black is a disadvantage. Once here, they start working. Some of them get good jobs. Others work as porters, waiters, etc. But regardless of what they are doing, they send exaggerated reports of comfort to their island homes while they suffer what they accept as temporary indignities. The porter seldom identifies himself with the successes or failures of the American Negro. Since he can't get a better job, he offsets the temporary indignity by joining societies and lodges and becoming a leading member. One thing he always says, he is much better off in the West Indies. He may return to live there after some years away, but usually he stays here, on his very tenuous montage, thinking that the fact that he came to America as an immigrant and not as a slave makes him so different from the Negroes whose forefathers were brought here in chains 300 years ago. There is no valid reason for this hysteria and false pride. The fact that the American Negro may have laughed at the African or West Indian several years ago is no justification for sniping for the sake of enhancing one's position in no man's land. We play into the hands of those who hate us most whenever we naively seek to dish out the same medicine which we have been swallowing for so many centuries. Yet, the tragic part of all this is the fact that we are all guilty in some way or the other of this very subtle crime. My aunt is a victim of this society which seeks to put man in different cells of his imagination and milk his essence, what little he has left of it, to divide him and then rule him. And when she tells me she is better than an American Negro, I tell her that what you are is always your constant companion, and you can only run so far. That when we amputate one leg to improve our gait, we stumble and fall into the dust of our souls. Now again, that was published in November of 1963. It was written by a West Indian immigrant, and everything that he wrote there basically was a Cliff Notes version of the entire message of the black media against the tethers and the tetherism that they bring here. Everything from the old stale talking point of, we're doing better in a short time. Well, yeah, when you go from a country that has no economy at all to a place where you can at least get a minimum wage job, I sure hope you can do something with it. All the way to the lies about, oh, those black Americans, they're like animals, I tell you. These are people who are actually taking their own self-hate and trying to project it onto someone else. I guess that's how they live with themselves. Now, obviously, I'm not referring to every single person from the West Indies to a man. The writer of that article is proof that it's obviously not everyone, but the problem is it is the majority. And we don't do ourselves any favors by closing our eyes and shutting our ears to that fact. This stuff has been going on before 1965. This is a prevailing attitude that they brought here with them. And as the writer said, it's based on nothing, and yet they do it because it makes them feel good. See, that's what happens when people have to flee from their country. When they choose to do that, how do they feel better about themselves? How do they look in the mirror and not see a failure? Well, what they do is they try to find somebody to dump on. But what happens when you decide to dump on the people who were the only ones who tried to help you? We would have to invent a new vocabulary to properly describe the kind of skullduggery and backstabbing that's been going on, which is exactly what the black media did. We invented new terms to properly encapsulate all of this backstabbing behavior and all of this treachery. I've already broken down for you how that talking point about the immigrant who surpasses the native-born Americans is a socio-political fiction. It's not actually true. Most immigrants, Caribbean or otherwise, do not own townhouses or have big businesses. That's an absurd exaggeration. They always take a handful of exceptions and then try to explode that into a lie that, oh, this is everybody who comes from this group. Don't dream. As this article pointed out, a lot of those individuals who come here try to find some way to get into the kind of circles and the kind of places where FBAs happen to be at. Just yesterday, we talked about a guy who had been in the country 25 plus years. This guy lied and claimed that he was a citizen, and yet somehow this man was allowed to get his hands on a doctorate, and he was allowed to become the school superintendent for a number of school districts. Given his background, it clearly wasn't because he was the most qualified. It's because the white powers that be, they looked at him and thought to themselves, this guy could be useful to us. And so he was, in more ways than one. But that lie that a number of these black immigrants like to repeat, that they heard from the white supremacists or from bootlicks like Thomas Sowell and other assorted morons, that, oh, these immigrants, they're just better than black Americans because of a superior culture. And they hear that stuff and they're thinking to themselves, oh, so that's the ticket, huh? That's the lick, isn't it? Oh yeah, I go ahead and repeat these talking points. Now I know who to dump on, and this will ingratiate me to the masters, right? When you point out that foundational black Americans also own townhouses and businesses, the tethers immediately move the goalposts and they say that, well, all black Americans should be owners of townhouses, etc., even though most black immigrants are not, even with all the government and corporate support they receive. Even though many of them are supposed to be educated before they get here, why is it that their education never goes to empower their home countries? How come they haven't figured out that trick yet? White supremacy has had long experience with weaponizing immigration against black Americans. It is actually a time-honored tradition for at least the last 200 years. And this is extended even to black immigrants. And these immigrants know it. The same way the Irish knew that even though they were being horribly oppressed by the British in Ireland, once they made it to the United States and met the cousins of those same British oppressors, there was a social policy of whiteness that they could gain access to, if they made it clear they would uphold the racial hierarchy. This article documents that even before the policy changes brought about by foundational black Americans in the 60s, you have immigrants from the Caribbean and also Africa who were bringing an attitude of contempt and disdain with them. Yes, there were riders, a number of them. But white power had long ago learned to identify a compliant and subservient Negro and weed out the ones who might be troublemakers. When these people run around with their accents and they're constantly talking about where they came from, they'll tell you where the hell they came from before they even tell you their name. What they're doing is they're trying to audition to white power. They're trying to advertise to the white powers that be that, hey, I've got no connection to those messy, troublesome FBAs over there. Hey, Massa, you can trust me. That's the unspoken part, though for a number of them, like Candace Owens and others, they say it openly. But what truly amazes me is people sitting here having the nerve to form their mouths to say that foundational black Americans have no ambition. Who the hell are they trying to fool? These are people who came to the U.S. and their accomplishment was to get a job, as if that's never happened before. Perhaps for them it hadn't. But what they really mean is that they failed to build an economy at home that would have sustained them financially. So in order to feel better about having to flee to where black people did build an economy, they trashed the people who opened doors for them and who made it possible for them to have opportunities and rights, the kind of rights they don't even have at home. And yet, as this article explains, they want to disassociate themselves from the people and the freedom struggle that made their so-called success possible. They love to claim, oh, racism? What racism? I don't see any racism around here. And why are they demonstrating and causing problems and all this? Why are they sitting here just agitating? I mean, there's nothing wrong with America. These white supremacists, why, they're just fine. There's barely a single hour that passes by that doesn't have some black immigrant claiming that racism isn't such a problem. And they come from a place where racism doesn't exist because, hey, in our countries back home, everyone's black. So, we don't really see racism in America. And then white society gives them their wake-up call, such as when Caribbean immigrants like Botham Jean and Akai Gurley and Patrick Dorisman are killed. And then suddenly they see racism everywhere. Well, that is until they realize, ooh, I still want to be in good with masses, so I forgive them regardless. All the anti-FBA hate, all the performative extremist rhetoric from them. They put on a pathetic display of denying reality. And the audience for their little sideshow isn't us. It's the dominant society that they're desperate to get in good with. And they hope that if they can just heap enough scorn on us publicly, then Zaddy will notice their shameless bootlicking and throw them a bone. And they actually think that this kind of behavior is smart. This has been going on for several generations now, well before the 60s. It explains their backstabbing behavior towards us when they get here, but it also explains why nothing ever got popping back in their home countries. It's just a fact. Builders don't hate, and haters don't build. This article was written over 60 years ago. I have to repeat that because you need to understand that this was before all the social and policy changes of the 60s. These people that this writer was talking about, they came over in the 1950s and earlier than that. And this was the attitude they brought with them. This is why they're ready to break their necks and jump out a window to tell everyone that they're Jamaican or Trinidadian or Barbadian or African or whatever. They understand the rules of racism, and they recognize full well that the reason that white power let them into the U.S. wasn't because it liked them. They did it because white power could weaponize immigration against us to maintain a racial pecking order, and as far as they were concerned, they'll play along with the divide and conquer strategy. That is, if they can get a few butter biscuit crumbs out of it. But you notice that not one of these self-described successful and ambitious West Indians ever lifts a finger to rehabilitate their home countries. Not even one. The Candace Owens and others can try to play the game of exalting their home countries, but just because these good white folks don't sit there and laugh in their faces doesn't mean that they're fooled. The dominant society fully recognizes these tethers for what they are, useful idiots. Tools for white supremacy, meant to be used and then broken. How does the tether live with the lie that they have become, though? Well, they do it by never looking at it. No black American has ever done anything to them, and yet they want to be the first to attack us. Why? Because above all, we remind them that they can never be white, which is what they really want. When we talk about opportunity and success, to the tether, these words mean the opportunity to finally be accepted as white. And success means that they successfully shed being black, and now they get to be bona fide Europeans. It's like the racial equivalent of Pinocchio. The problem for the people of the West Indies and for the Africans is that they never came to terms with why it is that their countries and the places that they eventually were dragged to became such easy prey for their oppressors. Why is it that these very individuals who love to brag about their alleged education and how in their countries, why everyone in the government's black, we know what it means to grow up and see that there's a black attorney general, black prime minister, black this, black that. How come all of these excellent, extraordinary minds never translated into these countries becoming the Singapore of the Caribbean? How come they can never get to that point? Spoiler, it wasn't because of black Americans. Though the way that these guys obsess over trashing us, you would think that we were the ones who colonized Africa and dragged these people in chains to the Caribbean. Isn't it amazing? These people, they think to themselves that they're better than foundational black Americans, even though they went through the exact same enslavement process, because apparently their slave ship made it to port first, so that makes them better. This is precisely the kind of infighting that they've practiced in their home countries for untold centuries, and now they've brought that same chaos here. There were a lot of black people who were overly optimistic, even naive, thinking to themselves that, hey, we've got that revolutionary spirit. It's just a matter of everybody else feeling comfortable enough to say it. It didn't occur to black folks for the longest time that maybe the reason that these other folks are not and have never been interested in overthrowing white supremacy is because they have always wanted to be part of it. When somebody has all of this deep contempt for you when you did absolutely nothing to them except for help them, when you have somebody who talks about you like a dog and regards you the exact same way that the white supremacists do, then what is your response to that kind of anti-black hostility to be? Well, I'll tell you what you shouldn't do. You shouldn't decide that you're going to just close your eyes to the truth and hope to yourself that maybe you can shame the tethers into showing respect for you and for themselves. Anti-black racism is based on lying images and false narratives from the white media. But for those trying to become white adjacent, they know that the extent to which the dominant society will throw them a few bones isn't based on how well they adhere to reality, but rather how slavishly they adhere to the narrative. This article points out that these tethers infiltrating our organizations and our groups and trying to find ways to destroy us from within, this isn't something that only came up in the last few years with Essence. This isn't even something that only came up since the 1960s. They've been doing it before. That's why I place special emphasis on how the writer of the article pointed out that there was this young man in Greenwich Village, 26 years old, and talking about black people as if he had been raised by the Klan. As the article pointed out, before there was a civil rights division in the DOJ, you had tethers like him infiltrating these civil rights groups. A pathetic worm who fled from his home country because he was too incompetent and too cowardly to build it up. And then he comes to the United States and he has the nerve to actually call foundational black Americans animals. No, we're not animals, though in his case he would qualify because he's certainly a snake. That's why he slithers on his belly for everything he wants. People like him, they hate foundational black Americans, but they won't hesitate to use our organizations to boost their own profile and to use us as a springboard to elevate themselves. You see, that's what they were doing back home too. That's the reason why they didn't build home up, because they sit there and exploit and take advantage of their own countrymen as well. That's the way that they do things. This article is just another data point. It is another piece of documentation showing that the problem of tetherism predates the 1960s. That's part of the reason why it's so deeply ingrained into the culture of these places. And this is the reason why Pan-Africanism could never work. It was damned to fail from the very beginning, because it was torn apart by its own internal contradictions. Pan-Africanism's a nice fantasy, but you can't live in a dream world. How in God's name are you going to have Pan-African anything or unity with people who call you animals, individuals who go out of their way to demonize you and try to degrade you, individuals who will shamelessly, ruthlessly try to take advantage of you, slithering their way into your organizations so that they can try to use you to benefit themselves, who will gladly sell you out to your historical enemies in a heartbeat, and then they'll sit there the whole time saying that your enemies were the good guys all along. How the hell are you going to have unity with that? But that's exactly what black people tried to do for the better part of a century. And the lies and the talking points and the feeble rationalizations that these tethers use, as you can see, they haven't updated their playbook in decades. But then again, they don't have to. White power is the same old, same old. Now, this article is from the November 1963 issue of Negro Digest. It's available to read for free on Google Books. The link's going to be in the description. This goes to show that, as Dr. John Henrik Clarke said, all history is a current event. Everything that has ever happened continues to happen. And I would add to that if you want to break these cycles, you better start doing something different than what you've done in the past. Now, facing up to an unpleasant reality is unpleasant in the near term, but the truth of the matter is you'll adjust to it. But if you decide that you just can't let it go, then the only thing you're going to be is tethered to a lie. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Brian Ellis, Sakina Collins, Diane Crowder, Christopher Pittman, and Mark Singleton. Salute to them, and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.